That's not a real thing. If you're lucky enough to find someone you can halfway tolerate, you sink your nails in and you don't let go, no matter what.
So what? I should just settle?
Yes, thank you. Exactly, settle.
Yo, what's up, you guys? Ooh, special little show today. Special little show today. Excuse me, I look awful. I'm still getting over a sickness. I was off the last 2 days, guys. I've just been super sick, but we have a very special guest today that I'm very excited about. So excuse my voice, excuse all that. Let's just call him on the line right away, get him in here. So yes, we've been talking about this for a while. We've always wanted this man on the show, and we finally got him for an hour here on the, hello.
Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Dara, how you doing, buddy?
Not doing brilliantly. I'm getting over a bug like you clearly are as well.
So why is everyone sick? It devastated me, dude. I couldn't even move the last 2 days. You're sick as well, and I feel like a bunch of streamers have been taking time off for sickness as well. But oh well, you're over it though. You're almost done.
I'm almost done. Yeah, I got mine at the Irish Open 2 weeks ago, and it seemed like half the people who played the Irish Open got the same bug. I always feel like live poker tournaments are the worst because it's like a big petri dish. We're all handling the same chips and cards.
Oh yeah, I feel it. Whenever I play live poker, I'm very into the hand sanitizer is a good thing and all that stuff. I always get sick after live poker. My girlfriend got me this one. I'm pretty sure she was sick and then just passed along to me. So if I turn off my mic for brief moments here to clear my throat or whatever, please excuse me. But hey, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about something else that you are very skilled at. So you, Dara, are known as an absolute killer when it comes to everything satellite poker. Do you want to give us a brief introduction on that?
Sure. Thanks for saying that, Kevin. That's very kind. Yeah. I mean, for people who don't know me, I've been playing poker for 11 or 12 years now. Been pro for just over a decade. And for the first 2 years, I specialized in sit and goes, and then I moved into satellites. And satellites were my main game for several years online. This is back in the sort of heyday of when there were a lot of online satellites on sites like Stars, and you could convert everything pretty much into tournament dollars. And that meant that you could build up a role base and play all your normal tournaments. So yeah, I very much specialized in satellites for a few years, and I quickly found out that they're very different from normal poker. So strategically, they're very different.
Nice. So satellites are not my area of expertise. I've worked really hard on my MTT game the last few years, and I've always had satellites in the lobby, and to me, they're like, go away. Like, I don't know how to play you. I've just pushed them into the back of my mind, and I always figured there'd be a time in my life where I was like, okay, I should actually learn the strategy, get good at them. Because one thing I see about them all the time is that they overlay all the time. Tons of overlay, and it seems like a ton of value.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Satellites are the one tournament that overlaid the most, both live and online. The reason for that is tournament organizers are often prepared to take a hit on an overlay on the satellites just to get enough people into their live events or their online events, because then that gets people talking about the event and playing and so on. So because of that, there's huge value in satellites. And not just that, but if you understand how different the strategy is from a normal tournament, you can actually have a very big edge even over like very good tournament players who don't understand the adjustments you have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So, guys, this is a good opportunity. So we're just going to go over a couple of brief things, and then we'll get some questions from the chat. Chill, hang out. Again, we're both a little bit sick, so excuse both of our voices, especially mine. So let's just start at the start. So you register a satellite tournament, and you're pretty deep. The first thing I think in normal MTT tournament is I'm looking to evaluate where am I at the table? What kind of skill level am I at? And the first thing I think about is accumulate chips. At the start of the tournament, especially if I'm at a soft table, I want to get involved with hands that play well with netted value, and I want to accumulate chips. So I just want to maybe we can go over opening ranges and how you adjust them. So for something for a normal tournament, I mean, this is very loose. We always talk about on my stream how you have to make massive adjustments based off of the the table and how everyone's playing. This is very, very, very loosey-goosey, something like this, 30% from the cutoff. And if we're from the button, we're like, 50% or so. Treat yourself. So at the start of a satellite tournament, is it just like treat it like a normal tournament?
To be honest, it is pretty much, yeah. I mean, the biggest strategic difference between a satellite and a normal tournament is that in a normal tournament, you're basically trying to win the tournament, which basically means you're trying to win every single chip in the tournament.
Yeah.
But if you have, let's say, a satellite with 100 runners and 10 tickets, you're not actually trying to win all the chips in the tournament because, yeah. If you win 10% of the chips and you've got 10% of the chips when there's 11 people left, that'll pretty much get you across the line. So there is a slight adjustment in the early stages, but it's very, very slight. It just means you should play a little bit tighter and you should be less willing to get all in than you would in a normal tournament. But certainly in terms of opening ranges, there's really very little difference.
Okay, that's cool. So at the start of the tournament, we're deep. I have this written down. This is my satellite notebook here. Normal tournament, we're trying to win every trip. Of course, that's pretty obvious. And then satellite tournament, we're not trying to win every single chip. So you're like, maybe slight adjustment. If I'm opening my 13% from early position or whatever, you're saying maybe take off the bottom couple hands that are closer to break even.
Exactly, yeah, and particularly hands that don't have nutters potential. Like early on, you're basically hoping to stack somebody by making the nuts when you're super deep. It obviously depends on your table as well. Like if your table is very weak and fishy, then we adjust, and if your table is tougher, we should tighten up. But as a default, certainly drop the sort of less nutty type hands from early position. I would still open pretty much my normal ranges in late position, particularly on the button, because essentially, like another big difference between satellites and normal tournaments is that in every tournament you're always trying to win without going to showdown, because obviously every time you go to showdown you run the risk of not actually having the best hand. But in a satellite, that's particularly true. So the less people you have to get through, and the more chance you have of winning without showdown, the wider you can open.
Well said. And that's something I got from your book as well. I did not finish the whole thing. Thank you for the copy, by the way. Dara sent me a copy of the book.
You're welcome.
It's very kind. It was a really good read, and I should definitely finish it. So that's something I think we can establish, and this is something you talked about in your book, is you're trying to accumulate chips in the start, but you're also taking like less crazy variance spots. I feel like you're trying to protect your stack a little bit more, even at the start of the tournament.
Absolutely, yeah. Like if you're taking high variance lines in a normal tournament, that's actually a pretty good strategy early on, because if you can build a big imposing stack, you can abuse people on the bubble. You can do all sorts of things. You can get to the final table with a big stack, and that gives you a much better chance of winning the tournament or a top 3 spot. But in a satellite, you're not actually trying to win the tournament or even come top 3. There probably won't even be a final table if there's more than 9 seats. So essentially, you're playing it as if you were trying to make the final table, and it didn't matter what stack you got there with. So, a lot of hands. You'd be happy to get all in with in a normal tournament. You're much less happy to get all in with early on in a satellite.
Well said. Not as happy to get it in late. Yeah. Especially if it's like a rebuy normal tournament, you can do some crazy stuff with some nut flush draws. You can just check, get it in. It's never that bad. But then in a satellite, you're like, especially
that's.
Sorry,
you're exactly right. Actually, that's exactly the type of hand that plays differently. Like a hand like King Queen suited, a lot of the value of that hand is being able to get it in first in a normal tournament, and then even if you get called, still have reasonable equity and then double up. That's not as valuable in a satellite, where you're actually risking busting the satellite 50% of the time.
For sure. Oh, Jamix in the chat says, "Hey, I've had a lot of coaching from Dara. Could not recommend him more. Very nice. I've won lots of tickets and lots of trips. One question for me." Well, first of all, that's high reviews already in the chat. Okay, we'll take your question. I'll have it on the side in a second. We're just going to wait for those for a little bit here. So any other major adjustments? You have, let's say, Dara, you have a good tournament player come to you. He's never played satellites before. He's a good winning player in normal tournaments. What are a couple of the things that you'd hammer home? What are the major adjustments?
Pretty much all of the major adjustments are late on. Early on, the only adjustments, apart from the ones we've already talked about, I would say, is that in my experience, you get a much different level of skill discrepancies between players in satellites than you do in normal tournaments, because you often have weaker recreational players taking a shot trying to qualify. So I would say that it's particularly important early on in a satellite just to try and identify who the weaker players are and what kind of mistakes they're likely to make, and then maybe target them, try to play more pots against them while staying out of the way of the better players. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest adjustment. Then when we get on to talking about the end game, that's where we'll see the real adjustments.
Nice. And I mean, that this is something I hammer home all the time too, especially in live tournaments. Is just like you have to know every player at the table. You have to try to play pots versus the recreationals, especially in position. So yeah, especially in a satellite, identify the weaker players and try to play pots against them as well. Okay, I mean, these are some very general overviews, but this is good stuff. So we're trying to accumulate chips in the early stages, maybe just chilling a little bit in big pots with hands like nut flush draws instead of trying to get them in. Let's move on to the medium stage, and I assume this is where we start to make some big boy adjustments.
Yeah, the medium stages. There's a couple of things which tend to happen in the medium stages of satellites. One is the stacks will obviously start to spread out. You'll have big stacks, medium stacks, and small stacks. If you're one of the small stacks yourself, the adjustment from a normal tournament won't be particularly big. You'll still play relatively normally. If you have a really big stack, you should be adjusting considerably, because basically, as we said earlier, you're not trying to win every chip in the tournament. You're just trying to win enough chips to get a seat. And there is a kind of a tipping point. If you take a satellite, let's take a concrete example where there are 100 players and there are 10 seats. So the average stack when the seats go out will be 10 times the starting stack. Now, if you happen to get 10 times the starting stack at the medium stage of a tournament, you have very little upside to trying to accumulate more chips. You can't win more than one seat. Really, all you're trying to do is to try and get to the line, maintain your stack, and then you'll get your seat. It's not like a normal tournament where you would be trying to push on and accumulate even more chips to give yourself a good stack for the final table. So there's a couple of things you should do in every satellite. In fact, right from the start, you should try and work out what the average cash stack will be. In other words, what the average stack will be when the seats go out. Now, that's usually relatively easy to do, because most satellites have like one seat for every 5 players or one seat for every 10 players. So you just multiply the starting stack by whatever that number is. And essentially that's like a target. And the closer you get to that target, the more cautious you should be about getting all in. And you're not really trying to accumulate more chips once you get to that target. You are literally just trying to tread water until the end. Because in a situation where you've already reached the target, like you're almost locked up, you're 90% for a seat. If you get it all in against somebody who covers you, okay, if you win, you move from 90% to 99%, so the upside is 9%. But if you lose, you're out, and you've gone from 90% down to 0. So because the downside is so much bigger than the upside, you just have to be super cautious.
So this is something you hammer home in your book a lot, as well as you call it guerrilla math. I like the wording, right? The guerrilla math.
Yeah, I call it guerrilla math because it's not real precise math, but it is the kind. It's close enough to the reality that you can use it usefully at the table. I mean, if you were to be absolutely precise, you'd need to have an ICM calculator, and you'd need to know every single chip stack in the tournament. That's never going to happen. So what we explain in the book are a few rough methods of working out. First of all, how many chips you're going to need for a seat, and secondly, when you get right at the end, what your chances of winning a seat are.
So, for example, let's just hit an example. So we're trying to figure out a target stack when we can get a ticket. Let's see if my guerrilla math is that good. We have 100 runners. Let's say the starting stack is 25,000 each, and 10% get tickets. So I'm going to say, 1 in 10 get a ticket. My starting stack is 25,000. So if I'm doing my guerrilla math correctly, when I have 250,000 chips, this is my target stack to get.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Nailed it.
And early on in satellites, that's the best indicator of what our chances are of a seat. So when you start with 25,000 and you know the target stack is 250,000, that means that roughly you got a 10% chance of a seat. If you make a really good start and let's say you get up to 100,000 and 250,000 is the target, if we divide 100 by 250, that's 40%. So now you've gone to a 40% chance of a seat. And obviously it caps out at 250. I mean, if you make an amazing start and you get up to 500,000, you don't have a 200% chance. You have roughly 100% chance. So
if I have 300,000 chips, for me to double up through a bigger stack and get 600,000, there's almost no gain. Like I almost have it.
There is literally almost no gain. Yeah, you in ICM terms, in guerrilla math terms, you'll just move from 100 to 100. In actual ICM terms, you might move from like 99% to 99.5%. But like compared to the 99% you're risking, that's absolutely nothing.
I mean, it is a little bit for someone like me who always isn't thinking in terms of winning the tournament, and to basically tell me that a double up was useless it's hard for me to grasp. I will get there eventually. A quick welcome into everyone who's just joining the Twitch channel. A lot of love for Dara in the comments. I believe it, man. I've been following Dara for a while. Again, excuse my voice, you guys. I'm a little bit raspy. I'm still coming over a bit of a cold, so I see lots of great questions already. We'll get to them soon. All right, so target stack, early stages, we've kind of established some absolute basics here. So in the medium stages, what's the generalized strategy? If we have let's say we have a decent amount of chips, we have about 50% of our target stack.
Yeah. 50% is kind of a key inflection point, because like based on what we were saying, if we're going to assess our chances of winning a seat, or what we refer to as chance of cashing in the book, as our current stack divided by the target stack, then when we have 50%, if we double up, we go from 50 to 100, and if we lose the all in, we go from 50 down to 0. So there's not a dramatic adjustment that has to be made there. But let's say we have 60% of the target stack and therefore 60% chance of a seat. Now, if we get it all in against a stack of a similar size, we will move from 60 to 100 if we win, but we'll move from 60 down to 0 if we lose. So we actually need 60% equity. We need to win 60% of the time for it to be correct to get it all in. And you mentioned there that it's difficult to accept that a double up is worth less than it is normally. And I think this is a reason why there are a lot of like really, really good MTT players, like absolute beasts, but they actually play satellites pretty badly, because they come into satellites with their regular game, which is, keep the foot to the gas and just play super aggressive the whole way. And actually that's a pretty big mistake in a situation where you have a big stack in a satellite. If we take the example even more extreme, like by the time you get up to 80% of the target stack, if you get it all in now, you are risking that 80% to gain only 20%. So you actually need to be a 4-1 favorite to get it in. So the bigger your stack is, the more cautious you have to be, and the bigger a mistake it is to get it all in.
Yes. So the closer you get, let's say we got 70% of the target stack, 80%. By the time we're getting in there, you have to have a massive equity favor and like you said in the book multiple times, in extreme cases where even with kings it's a disaster, even with queens it's a bit of a disaster. Which again,
I mean, there are even spots in satellites, and again, this is jumping the gun slightly because it only happens at the end, but there are spots where you have to fold even aces, because you might be 90 or 95% for a seat, so aces won't have the required equity to call off, which is what makes satellites so weird and so different.
Cool. Another thing I always wonder with satellites is basically, I mean, this is very, very dumbed down, is that in normal tournaments, when I'm between 20 plus big blinds, I'm using an opening strategy to like min raise to 2.5x. And whenever I get less than 20 big blinds, I start maybe still min raising some, but I start open shoving more. But you talk about in satellites that this is very bad and we have to adjust this.
Yeah, it's very bad, particularly in the late stages where we don't want to get it in. And again, this is kind of a throwback to what we said right at the start, that in one of the biggest adjustments from normal tournaments to satellites is that in satellites we want to win without showdown, much more than in a normal tournament. So in a normal tournament where we are trying to accumulate all the chips, or at least get a big stack for the final table, when we have a very strong hand, even with less than 20 big blinds, we will want to open and hope that somebody behind us goes all in and we can call, or three bets us and we can shove all in. So we will tend to be inducing our stronger hands, as we call it. And then because we're doing that with some strong hands, we can also do it with some weak hands, which we're willing to fold if we get raised on. But in a satellite, you never, ever want to be raise folding at this point of the tournament, and there will be almost no hands that are strong enough to raise call. Maybe aces, but I mean, if the only hand that we can raise call is aces, it's pretty clear what happens or what we have when we do raise. So what tends to happen in satellites is the correct strategy diverges very much from a normal MTT, in that we just go all in with all the hands that we decide we're going to play. And we fold everything else.
And this is, we start to adapt this near the medium stage of the tournament. So let's use our example. 100 runners are left. When are we starting to use an open shoving strategy?
It depends on how near we are to the bubble and what our chance of cashing is. So in other words, what's our stack in relation to the target stack, or in the end game, obviously other people's stacks come into the account. So in the medium stages, it would be when we're past the 50% point, and we don't want to open, get shoved on, and have to call off, because the downside of losing is so much more than the upside of winning. So anytime the downside is much bigger than the upside, we just want to open shove. And you will even see like spots in satellites late on where people are open shoving 30, 40, 50, 60 big blinds for exactly that reason.
It's wild. It's a wild world out there. See that? I remember playing some satellites on streams, and I raised tens in late position. Someone shoved. I called, and like chat was like, "What are you doing?" And then it's just a completely different world. So I wrote this down in bold. Almost no hands are strong enough to raise call, except for aces. But then we have a major our overall strategy is really disastrous if we're only been raising. You know, I've messed around enough with programs like ICMizer to know that if you're raising and not calling shoves a lot, people can exploit you, and it just creates a disastrous situation. So eventually in the medium stage, if we're getting close to that target stack, we're just going to use a strategy where we're all in or folding.
Yeah,
not a lot of post flop play. Not a lot of post flop play there.
Almost none. Yeah,
almost none.
Yeah, I mean, post-flop play is problematic in any situation where we really don't want to get all in, because, you know, another adjustment we have to make is to defend our big blind a lot less if we're not willing to go all in pre-flop. Because, you know, when you have a pretty hand in a normal tournament and somebody min raises, we're normally very happy to defend and see what comes down. But in the same way, as I said, like early on in a satellite, you don't want to get in 2 overs and a flush draw. You definitely don't want to do that in the medium stages. So when you have hands that tend to flop that kind of equity, that you're going to have to get it all in to realize the equity, but you really don't want to get it all in because of the overall strategy of satellites. Then you can't even defend those hands pre-flop because they're not going to realize their equity.
That's a good point, and something that this is also. Obviously more extreme in satellites, but the same thing in final tables. When you're a medium stack and there's shorter stack presence, you can't defend your big blind as wide against big stacks because they can just they can triple barrel you off hands very easily. You don't get to realize your equity. So it's a similar concept there, one that I've been learning. So defend the big blind way less if you can't withstand the pressure of the post flop play. So I mean, what's an absurd what's an example of a hand that you're just passing in the big blind that, you know, would seem crazy to us?
I mean, there are super extreme situations like right on bubbles where, let's say we're second in chips and there's 10 seats and we're on the exact bubble, so 11 players left, and the chip leader opens into our big blind.
Mm-hmm.
You might actually have to defend to fold almost everything. And the example I always give to illustrate this point is that the first time I ever qualified for the World Series main event, it was on a super satellite on Stars where there was like 54 seats, over 1,000 runners. I was one of the shorter stacks as the bubble came up. In fact, I was pretty short the whole way through. But so I was sweating every other table to see who was short. So on the exact bubble, like 55 left, 54 seats or 54 packages worth 14K. There was a guy in another table who was down to an ante. So I kind of relaxed and thought, okay, well, that should be the end of the tournament. And then on my table, there was the guy who was the overall chip leader. So like 1 of 55. And there was another guy who had a big stack. I think he was 3 of 55. And the big stack opened into the other guy's big blind, and the guy defended. And the flop came king 4-3. And the guy who was third in chips just open shoved.
Oh no! Oh no! This is a disaster.
Yeah, this is a disaster. Now the other guy called. Now the guy who'd opened shoved had pocket kings, so he defended kings pre-flop and he'd flop top set. So in a normal tournament you'd say, yeah, that's whatever.
Great.
But the problem he had was the other guy had aces on, even though he had been opening every hand. He had aces this time, and he decided to call it off, which is pretty bad too, to be honest. But and he hit runner the wheel to knock the set of kings out. And the guy with one ante on the other table ended up getting the 14K package. Now that's a really extreme example, but in that spot, I would have even folded aces in the big blind. I would have just said, well, the tournament's over. There's literally no point in getting involved here.
Yeah, there's a certain stage where it's just done. There's a certain stage. Another quick satellite story was in Reno. I was playing a satellite, and a very fun atmosphere. And there was a one ante guy on the other table who was sweating really hard, and there was like an older gentleman on my table, bless his soul, he was like the sweetest person ever, but he had so many chips, he shoves I think like 40 big blinds, and everyone's like, what are you doing? You can just wait, you can just fold. And then some guy called him off, and he had nines, and some guy was trying to explain, it's like, you had 40 big blinds, you had the seat locked up. It's just like, it's not my style to fold nines in a tournament, son. Bless his soul. He was a very nice individual, but yeah, he bubbled, and then the guy with one ante. So this is something you see in live satellites exactly all the time. What I mean, it's going to be different. You're talking about the glory days when satellites were massive, especially on all the online sites. Do you mind sharing like what ROI you had, or what ROI you were striving after, or what was possible?
Yeah, for a lot of the time, I specialized in a really fast format of satellites. They were called 3Xs. I think they're called Splash now on Stars, but they don't run very frequently, or nothing like they used to in the glory days. And I had more than 100% ROI in those because people were playing them horrendously badly. The weird thing about those were they were basically they were rebuys with giant add-ons. So you got a 5K starting stack, and you could rebuy as many times as you wanted. And then when you got to the add-on, you got an add-on of 10 times that amount, 50K chips, for the same amount. So the only really big mistake you could make back then was to drop out before the add-on, because the add-on was so big in relation to the to the starting stack. And people used to play those really badly because people used to actually drop out, and that was where a lot of my equity came from in those. In normal satellites over my career, I've got something between a 50 and 60% ROI.
I mean, that's really solid.
Yeah, and it has. In full disclosure, it has been coming down in recent years because people obviously do play satellites better than they did 8 or 9 years ago. Live satellites are still very, very soft, but online, certainly there are more people who have a good grasp of the strategy.
People are understanding. We have a bad beat story in the chat here. It sounds bad, though. Some guys, Asifo is talking about how he just bubbled.
Oh, I know Asifo well. Yeah, Asifo actually sent me this hand. Yeah, yeah, that was a bad beat. The problem in satellites, Asif's came from a Vegas satellite. Where I think he was the second biggest stack at the table, or maybe third, but there was a short stack, and he got ace king under the gun, so he just open shoved, and a guy decided to call off with tens in a spot where really he should only call aces. The problem with satellites is that even if you do the right play, sometimes if somebody else makes a mistake, that can be disastrous for you as well. And that's something we talk about quite a bit in the book as well. We call it adjusting to imperfection. It's where you know that the right strategy is to shove, but you have the sense that somebody behind you is going to do something stupid and call too wide, and how much you have to adjust then based on that.
Yeah, that's something that's very, very, very common. You can basically, it's like It's like nuclear war. You destroy each other's equity, and you just like give everybody else the win. And I had a similar situation on one satellite, like where I open shoved, and the guy called with 9s. He never should have, and we had the same stack. So it just put us in a spot where one of us were going to be the bubble boy, no matter what. Like it's a huge victory for everyone else at the table. Interesting. So you talk about that in the book. I did not get to that chapter. I'm really interested to hear.
Yeah, that's
about
right
that.
at the end.
Yeah. So interesting. Medium stages, like we talked about, you guys. A couple of the key concepts that Dara nailed home. Almost no hands are strong enough to raise call. So eventually we're getting to a stage where we should just be open shoving to take the pot down, even with our entire range. And also, this is a good note, defend the big blind way less versus stacks that can put pressure on just because we can't realize the equity. All right. These are some really good things that I am learning for the first time. Late stage satellite. And in your book, I love how you start. In your book, you say, hey, let's jump right to the late stage because it's the most important with satellites. So if you ever get Dara's book, and you should get Dara's book, you jump right to the late stage because of how important that is in satellites. So thoughts on the late stage in satellites, Dara?
Yeah, I mean the late stages are really where all the money is. Like we've touched on the early stages and how there's very little difference between how you would play a normal tournament, and in the medium stages you do start to get more strategic adjustments. But the late stages just play so radically different, and it's where people make by far the biggest mistakes that will cost them. So our idea in writing the book was, I mean, I've read a lot of sorry, I shouldn't say I've read a lot of poker books. I've started to read a lot of poker books, and with the best will in the world, I haven't made it to the end of the book. So we felt, well, let's put the really important stuff at the start, so that if people do bail on the book, at least they'll have gotten the most important stuff, which is the end. And it's also the stuff which is most radically different from a normal MTT. So in the late stages, it really doesn't matter anymore to a large degree what your cards are. It's much more important. Your stack, your position, how close to the bubble you are, and what the other players behind you yet to act are still like. There are spots where, you know, if it folds around to you in the cutoff or on the button, where you should shove any 2 cards because the players behind have to fold everything. And then there are other spots where the players behind, maybe even though they're supposed to fold everything, are actually going to call a bit too wide, and you might not be able to, you might have to reduce your shoving range all the way down to 10%. I remember once running a spot for a bunch of students where a guy had open shoved. I think it was the hijack he'd open shoved, and his shove was correct in the sense that if everybody behind knew they were supposed to fold almost everything, then he could actually get away with shoving 90%. This was a spot where if you looked at snap shove or some GTO tool, it would tell you that it was correct to shove 25%, but because they were supposed to fold everything behind, the shoving range expanded out to 90%. But in this case, there were 1 or 2 players behind who were going to call too wide. So one of the good things about the tools like HRC and ICMizer is you can put in what you think the actual calling ranges are. And when we reran the spot with the actual calling ranges, we found that the shoving range went down from 90%, even lower than the 25% GTO range, all the way down to 10%, just because of those 2 guys behind, who are going to call too wide.
It is pretty crazy, and like you've obviously spent hours and hours with programs like ICMizer, and you can like just, this is a quick visual of what Dara's talking about. It is, in this situation, there's 3 satellite tickets, all of the same stack. GTO, you can just shove anything because nobody can call you, right? You can shove 85% because the person, the big blind, is supposed to call jacks, queens, kings, aces. As soon as you get into that person's mind and they start calling hands like suited broadways and stuff, the calculator goes like, oh no, this is really bad, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to shove 5%. It's like if we're in GTO land, you can shove any 2, but as soon as people start playing incorrectly, you know, we're down to shoving 4 or 5%. So these are very sensitive. These ranges are very, very, very sensitive to if people are overcalling, which I assume a lot of times are. So in a stage like this is obviously a drastic situation. This is one that, like, I play a lot of party poker satellites where 2 people get tickets, 3 people get tickets, 4 people get tickets, and this is one I'm in a lot where there's 4 people, there's 3 tickets. I play tight, and I always find like I blind down until I'm the shortest stack, and then I have to take a spot. And I feel like I bubble this way more often than I should. So what are some things I should look to navigate a situation like this?
Yeah, you can. You sometimes people do over adjust in the sense that once they get into their head that they tight, they tighten up too much. Um, so each bubble situation is kind of unique in the sense that it really depends on what your chance of a seat is, and once your chance of winning a seat drops below 50%, you should pretty much switch to playing normal ranges. But when you're above 50%, you do have to be much tighter, particularly in spots where you're either calling off or you suspect that you will be called off quite a lot. But one example of a situation that often comes up is like if you're on a bubble, let's say with three players left, 2 seats, and one guy is more or less locked up, and you and the other guy have roughly the same stack. Now, in that situation, the guy who's locked up is more or less 100%, and you're roughly 50% with the other guy for a seat. Now, if he shoves, you should actually call pretty wide because if you win against him, you move from 50 to 100. So the upside is actually equal to the downside. And if you overfold in that spot, he's going to keep chipping up, and you'll be chipped down. So there are actually weird spots in satellites and bubbles where, because of the stack distributions, you're actually supposed to call a bit wider than GTO.
Oh, that's super interesting.
Yeah, and you need to be aware of those.
So you're in this spot. Let's say one guy has a lot of chips. He has it locked up, and then there's so 2 people have it locked up. 2 people have lots of chips, and then you and this one guy are short. You're saying you're supposed to call off that guy wider because if you bust him, your chance to get a seat goes to 100%.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, it's now almost like a winner takes all satellite between you and the other guy.
Yeah, and the other 2 are irrelevant.
To his shoves, you're basically just allowing him to pick up free chips, which is one problem. But the other problem is this is actually a spot where your upside is equal to your downside, in the sense that if you bust him, if he's playing correctly, he'll be shoving wider than normal, and you should actually be calling wider than normal. And if you're not calling wider than normal, he has a massive advantage of being able to shove into you.
Interesting. Very, very, very cool. Also, there's a big difference between that situation where there's 2, 3 tickets, 4 tickets. And then there's a big difference between, like, let's say a live poker tournament where it's a super satellite and they're giving away 40 tickets or 45 tickets.
100%. Yeah. The more tickets there are, the tighter you have to be. Like we talked about that situation where one guy is locked up and the other 2 are competing for a seat. So they're 50-50. So because they're only 50-50, they can play relatively close to normal ranges. But in a super satellite, the more tickets are being handed out, the higher chance, the better the chances of an average stack of winning a seat. For example, let's say there are 10 players left, and 9 seats. So rough common sense would tell us that if we have an average stack at that point, given that 9 of the 10 players are going to win a seat, we're 90% for a seat. So we need 90% equity to call an all-in, which is basically no hand. If you go up even more, if you go up to like 50 seats, now the average stack is 98%. So like getting it in is such a disaster to take that 98% chance of bubbling compared to the 2% upside. So super satellites just play ridiculously different. You have situations usually it's the case in a super satellite that if the other guy covers you, you just can't play any hand.
Yep. So guys, note that like if there's two tickets, 3 tickets, you still have to place a man's battle or else you'll blind away. But when you're dealing with the super satellite, like I mean, a lot of people in chat are talking about going to the WSOP. When you have these massive super satellites, busting it at the end is just a total nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
Guys, cool. We've already been going for 40 minutes here. It's just flown by. We've covered some really good easy basics. Dara, if people want to get in touch with you, I think obviously I had your Twitter up there for a while. Here's your Twitter. Also, link to the book probably on your Twitter.
Yeah, there is a link somewhere there. I think probably on the.
Has it been popping, or are you number 1 in Europe's best-selling books?
We got to number 1. I think we're number 2 at the moment, but we did get to number 1 in the UK. We also got to number 1 in the US, which was really heartening because obviously the US is a much bigger market and harder to crack. So given that we basically self-published through Amazon and we don't have a large publisher behind us doing the PR, we're really, really happy with the way the book has been going. It is a kind of a proof of concept for us because, I've been writing satellite strategy content down the years for magazines or whatever, and I have talked to a couple of the big trading sites about doing a series on satellites at different points, and they always more or less came back with the same answer, which was that satellites are too much of a niche. There's not a big enough demand out there for specifically a satellite book. But I strongly disagree with that view because I think, first of all, satellites are so different that you just need one satellite book to explain the differences, and that covers it. But also, I think a lot of recreational players play more satellites, let's say proportionally, than people like you or me, and they're the type of players who are going to benefit the most. They want to qualify for the WSOP, they want to qualify for Party Millions event, whatever. And so we felt that there would be a demand from that type of player who maybe don't normally buy strategy books, but they would buy ours.
Interesting. Yeah, guys, hit him up on Twitter. Absolutely. I know for me, like whenever I load up a satellite on the stream, people go nuts for it, especially at the end. It's such a sweat when there's, 6 tickets and 8 people are left and you're making some big folds. I know it makes my stream pop and people get very excited about it.
Oh, yeah.
Guys, I have read the book as well. Very, very, very good. And if you guys want to get good at satellites, I think it's the best. All right, questions. You sick, Kev? Yes. But we're battling. We finally got Dara on the show, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Do you guys have any questions for Dara? We're on no delay here, so you can put them in the chat. I'll take it right away. All right, Schwibbers. What's up, Schwibbers? Good to see you, buddy. ROI question. If I'm a decent/okay winner at $20 tournaments and I play a $20 satellite to a $200 tournament or bigger, and I'm clearly a losing player in that stake, where's the value? Just curious about this. Interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, and that's something people don't think about. Given that the prize in a satellite is entry to a bigger tournament, if you're a losing player, then you have to factor that in. So if you're playing $20 satellites and the prize is a $200 ticket, let's say you're a minus 10% player. So on average, you're only going to realize 180 of that $200. Then the way to think about it is that you have to subtract that minus 10% from your satellite edge. So if you have more than a 10% edge in the satellite itself, that's negated by the minus 10% edge you have in the tournament. But if you have, say, a 20% edge in the satellite, it's still profitable for you to play the satellite, even though you're slightly minus EV in the target tournament.
Yeah, well said. Swibber says, excellent answer. Waga says, if we assume every player is playing with a fold everything mindset, when does just open raising become very profitable and a viable strategy?
Yeah, that's a tricky question to answer because it really depends. Like if you open every single hand, particularly in a live, like people will adjust eventually and start playing back. So in situations where you're just trying to maintain your stack, it's a much better strategy to just open once or twice in orbit and try and maintain your stack that way than switching to an open everything. But probably the clear situation where it's profitable to open everything is when you have such a commanding stack that you're basically at no risk. And you'll often see this in super satellites at the end. The chip leader will either be opening every hand or open shoving every hand. But there are some risks attendant with that. Like somebody might be supposed to fold 100% when you shove, but they might not realize that, and they might make a call, which then drags you back into the mix. So generally, the spots where it's okay to raise everything, they're not massively profitable spots anyway. They're spots where you'll be more or less locked up. But certainly, if you find yourself at a live satellite where people are just overfolding, they're playing too tight, and that's possible as well. Then you can switch to a raise everything or certainly raise wider strategy. That's actually what I used to do in satellites up until a few years ago, almost by default. Like there were a number of times. Let's say I was playing 5-seat satellites. So we get to the final table with 10, and I would be one of the shortest stacks, and yet I would comfortably get over the line just by opening every time it was folded around to me because people overfolded back then. To be honest, that doesn't happen as much anymore. So it's a much riskier strategy these days.
Interesting. So people have gone better. I like this. Peggy Hill says, Dara, how many times have you folded aces pre in your lifetime?
Oh, it's got to be at least 50. Yeah, it's got to be at least 50, and it's obviously always been in a satellite. But yeah, there are spots where I would just open folded aces. One that springs to mind is when I qualified for the Caribbean last year. Right on the bubble, the chip leader on our table was obviously enjoying the fact that he was chip leader and he was completely impervious. So he was open, shoving every hand and shoving over every raise and calling all the all-ins. I guess he was trying to get the satellite done. And I got dealt aces under the gun. And I thought, okay, there's no good option here. If I open shove, he's going to call. If I raise, he's going to shove. And I was locked up as well. So I ended up just having to fold aces.
I mean, it makes you feel good. That's a fun one for sure. Hey, your pal, your partner in crime, Barry Carter, in the chat. Hello, Barry. How you doing, buddy? He says,
Hi, Barry.
Barry Carter. Have you played differently in the big satellites recently? Because you're suspicious the regs have read your book.
Very good question. Probably not, to be honest, because I think like the regs kind of knew my strategy anyway. Like I've played so many satellites down the years, and I have a ridiculous number of hands on some of the regs, which means they have a ridiculous number of hands on me. And I have fairly detailed notes on a lot of them, and I'm sure they have similar notes on me. So, but I think probably I do have to adjust my strategy somewhat against people who don't know me as well, more because not just because of the book, but I do feel that over time, information tends to spread out anyway, and so more and more people are playing satellites correctly. So that caused me to adjust my strategy. Actually, the biggest adjustment I had to make, the only reason I agreed to write this book with Barry when he came to me a year and a half ago or whatever it was I thought I wasn't going to be playing very many satellites anymore because they'd more or less dried up online. And I was just playing regular MTTs. But obviously the party PPL leaderboard revitalized satellites. So actually, having started writing the book, I suddenly found myself playing lots of satellites again. And I did have to make a big adjustment because they played so differently from 2 years ago. Let's say 2 years before that, when I specialized in satellites, the regs played them a lot differently. So there was a lot of going back to the drawing board and running simulations again in Hold'em Resources Calculator and ICMizer to see what adjustments I needed to make. I think I made the most adjustments there, and they ended up in the book as well.
Very interesting. Very, 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 very interesting. I'm going to be excited to play a few more of these on stream, and especially the ones with overlay. They look super, super amazing. Kristenborg with a question. What up, Chris? Thank you for the 40-month resub. Kristenborg, I don't know. He grinds a lot of MTTs. I don't know if he's a satellite player that much, but he says, what's the line when deciding to open fold big hands? For example, with queens and kings, you're 75% versus any two. So if you're less than that to fold, it's probably too general of a question, he says. Kristenborg, I think Dara was touching on that. It comes back to what percent you have of your target stack, correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. The important thing at every stage of satellite is to keep an eye on this chance of caching concept that we explain in the book. And any time your chance of caching rises above 50%, the amount of equity you need rises to exactly the same number. So if you're 75% versus any two, I mean, the guys are probably not going to call any two. If let's say you're 75% against the calling range, then when you're shoving first, it's slightly complicated because he's going to fold sometimes and call sometimes. But let's say he open shoves and you think you're 75% against his shoving range, but you are more than 75% to get a seat by folding. Then you have to fold. It's basically the reason why we need to know this number, this chance of cashing numbers. It's exactly the amount of equity we need to get all in those spots.
Yep, and just to hammer that home, Chris, as well, we were talking about that earlier. Target stack is a guerrilla math that we do to figure out how many chips do we need to kind of like hit the brakes a little bit. So this example we were talking about earlier, if we have 100 runners, 10 people pay tickets, and the starting stack's 25,000 chips, when we get 10x the 250,000, that's when we can really chill and try to lock up the seat. Good question, though. Good question. Oh, that's a good one. This is what I wonder all the time. Dara, what is your view on late regging satellites?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Late regging satellites is so profitable, I almost feel like it should be banned. It's insanely profitable because, like in a normal tournament, late regging has some advantages and some disadvantages. In your chances of cashing increase, but your chances of a really top 3 spots, they go down a bit. So there's a kind of a balancing effect. That doesn't apply at all in a satellite because you're not trying to finish top 3, say in a satellite with 10 or 20 seats. You are literally just trying to cash. So like I've done some calculations where late regging is so profitable that if you late reg a $10 satellite, you're basically getting $20 in equity at that point.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's massively profitable, and it's never unprofitable. It is always profitable. And the other advantage of late regging, obviously, is that you take out the early stages where the strategy is less clear. Let's say in the later stages, if you master end game strategy in satellites, and then you're allowed to late reg into the middle or end game, you're going to be insanely profitable overall in satellites.
Really? So there's never a situation in satellites where you would rather register on time than late register?
The only situation I would is if it's a big live satellite and there are tons and tons of really weak players in the field, and I feel that those guys are the value and they're going to lose their chips early on. But online these days, I literally almost never reg from the start. I almost always late reg last minute. And yeah, it's just mathematically it's insanely profitable. It also for guys like you and me who have to keep an eye on our hourly as well, it's really good for our hourly if we can just cut out all the early stages and play a satellite that's going to be over in an hour or 90 minutes by late regging.
That's a really interesting take. That's crazy. What up, Eric? How you doing, mate? Chat's going nuts. They're like, late reg is the best. Late reg is the best. Swivers, guys, any other questions here? We're going to have Dara for another 15 minutes. Actually, let's take a look at a couple of hands. We got a couple loaded up here. Let me boot up my poker tracker. Before the show started, we were looking through them, and they're few and far between because I don't have much satellite experience. But let's load up these. These are some hyper turbo satellites that Stars used to run, and bless their souls, I still love them even though I'm no longer associated with them. Replay all hands and report. Cool. This will be cool because this is basically like satellite late game in a nutshell. So, can you see this, Dara?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Is it too big? Is it too small for you?
It's fine.
Oh, you can see it on the stream. Okay.
I can see it on the stream. Yeah,
you can see it on the stream. All right. So this is a satellite situation where there's two tickets awarded, and you start 6-handed, and everyone has 10 big blinds, and it's wild madness. Quick 5-month resub. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Siren Song. Thanks.
Playing my first live tourney tonight. Watching you for some warm up. Show me how to poker tongue.
Yo, thank you so much. Appreciate that 5-month resub. Good luck. So I assume it should be open shove or fold, obviously.
Yeah, we have 10 big blinds effective, so there shouldn't be too much of anything else happening.
This is a mistake. It's just all in or fold every single time here. Oh,
yeah, this is weird. I mean, maybe the guy has aces, and but yeah.
If you see like ace-10 offsuit here, it's just a huge disaster.
Yeah.
Ace-6 offsuit.
Ace-6.
So G Byron 2012 has not read your book, Dara.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, full equity is more like not as much in this as in the satellites that we were talking about, but even in this where there are like 6 players, 2 seats, we're essentially trying to come second. The way I sometimes explain this to people is that, like, imagine there was a tournament where you're not trying to win the tournament, but you're told that if you don't cash this tournament, you're going to be killed.
Oh.
And how would you adjust your strategy based on that information? And I think most people would realize, yeah, I'm actually going to play a lot tighter, and I'm not going to raise call ace-6. Spot.
That's a funny way. Hey, Barry Carter, your partner has dropped the old sub towards me. That's very nice. Very nice of him. Okay, so he's out. So now, I mean, this guy has a really good position to cash this right now.
Yeah, I mean, he should more or less be locked up now. He shouldn't, well, not quite locked up. I guess 1,500 is the target stack. But he's doing the right thing in the sense that if he's decided to play the hand, he should just shove it.
Yep.
Rather than raise and have to call it off. Because as it stands, he's roughly, what is it, like 70% towards the seat. So his upside of winning an all-in now is much smaller than the much smaller than the downside. So he should just be open shoving. Apart from the fact that you two guys in the blinds have less than 10 bigs anyway.
I'm going to take a crack at this. I'm going to guess the calling range here. Let me think about it for a minute, and then you tell me if I'm right or not. I would definitely call... I mean, we have to take some gambles because we're obviously very short. So I think I would call... I think I would call something like this. 7s plus, ace-10 off plus, ace-8 suited plus, king-queen suited.
Yeah, it's possible it's even wider than that, because purely because of the fact that because that guy has so much he's not exactly locked up, but let's say he's 70%. So the other 5 of you who all have roughly, or 4 of you who all have roughly equal stacked, if he's got 70%, then you've got 130% between the 4 of you, because there are 2 seats. So you're all roughly 40%. Oh no, I've done the math wrong. You're all roughly 30%, just over 30%. So actually, you should be calling very, very close to what your normal calling range would be,
because we're below that
50%.
So as soon as we get over that 50%, that's the threshold where it just really gets crazy.
That's the point at which it starts to really change. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm too tight there. All right, we fold king 2. This guy is like got a lock here. Feeling really good. Open shove, call. What do you think about these 2 hands? Oh, king jack, aces seems good for both.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, if we are these 2 guys are basically on cruise control, and we're the ones who have to make moves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're both 60 to 70%. So if we assume they're like they've got 140% of the equity between them, and it's 200% because it's 2 seats, then you 2 guys are only 30%, and probably even less actually, because in relation to their stacks, you're very short. So you guys just have to play super normal now, and they have to be much more cautious.
Yep. So he gets a shove through. That's bad.
Yeah, he's actually in a great seat there, because if they're playing correctly, they know that they're supposed to call tighter because they're almost locked up. So he gets to shove on the button, and they will fold it off.
Yep. Because calling and losing such a big percentage of your stack would be devastating. I don't know if I won this ticket or not. I can't remember. Hey, we get a walk. That's very nice.
Walk a suit. Yeah, again, like in that spot, a good player in the small blind will recognize pretty wide, or you should be calling off pretty wide, and therefore he's not going to shove wide, because he literally just wants to cruise to the ticket now, keep the stack until after the bubble. He's not trying to get to 2,000 chips. He's 1,500 is the target, and he's close enough to that he really just wants to cruise there.
What do you think about his raise and his? I mean, he's still playing 20 big blinds. Is this open fine?
This is weird. This is weird. I don't think he should be. I think maybe the reason why he's raising, the only excuse I could have for this is if he has a hand which is strong enough to raise, call you 2 guys in the blinds, because you have 9 bigs and you both have about 9 bigs. But he doesn't want to run into anything on the button where the guy covers him. But yeah, he should still be open shoving most of his range. This is a kind of a weird move.
Yeah, it's weird we see a flop in this format. It's a little bit strange.
That is really weird, yeah.
Jack 2. So
again, like Shark Leg can play relatively normally, but the other guy, ironically, the other guy, even though he has more chips, is the one who has to play more cautiously. Shark Leg should just shove any 2 now.
Any 2 shove, you agree with that? A7 call?
Yeah, I do agree with that. The A7 call, yeah, that feels close, but it can't be too bad, because apart from anything else, the guy is significantly shorter than him. So worst case scenario, he's still going to be in place with 815. The other guy will still have less chips, and then you'll be in 4th place. It's still a spot where he's supposed to fold a lot, even though the guy is shoving any 2. But A7 feels a bit strong.
So now I'm in a tough spot where I'm likely just to bubble this.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to play normally now.
I mean, he's never going to raise call. Like this is like fake hope, right?
Yeah, he's getting exploited here. Like by raising now, I mean, unless he's so bad that he is going to raise calls sometimes. Leo Bello can literally close his eyes and shove any 2 cards profitably, because he just can never call this. If he calls this and loses, he's suddenly going to be have the same stack as you, and he goes from being almost locked up to being 50-50. So
Yeah. Is that a spot where you know that he can never call and you can just pile, like in game, would you shove like 6-5 offsuit here?
yes, but I would need to be confident good enough to know that he has fold. The fact that he's opening in the first place suggests he might not be.
Yeah.
Rather than just open shoving. But certainly if it was a reg, I would know he literally has no raise call range, so I can shove any two.
Because let's say in theory, if he did raise call a hand like ace jack offsuit, as bad as that is, you guys have just given me so much equity. It's like you guys have both.
That's yeah, that really is the key. It's I mean, it's just an amazing transfer of equity if that happens.
And you can't really I mean, if you have experience, I feel like a lot of people should not be autopiloting satellites just because they're so different and they're so unique.
Yeah, that's true. There's actually, I think there's far more to think about at the end of a satellite than in a normal tournament, because also the bubble is so big. Like, if you bubble a normal tournament, yeah, that sucks, but you basically just lost out on the min cash. But in a satellite, the min cash is the same as the first prize. So you basically bubbled first place. So that's a huge thing, and we actually talk about that in the book as well. That makes satellites much more difficult from a mental game perspective. Because people are so afraid of bubbling, and bubbling is so devastating. It can take longer to recover from.
And Krista Borg in the chat says, part of the reason I don't like satellites is that people can make incorrect decisions and hurt your equity. It's very annoying at the low stakes. I feel you, buddy. So
yeah, that's 100% true.
We're kind of in bad shape here.
We're in such bad shape now that we're so much shorter than them that they can call us kind of wide. So because of that, we kind of have to stick to normal shoving ranges, and that basically means we're somewhat at the mercy of the deck of being dealt cards that are profitable to shove.
So I think before we see what I do here, we should definitely be all in here for 4 bigs. Harder for him to call. Yeah. Any two 9-2 offsuit.
I wouldn't go any two. Ooh, actually, no, I might go any two here. Yeah, although this is my perception looking at this hand history is that this is the weakest player in the big blind, and therefore the one most likely to call off too wide. I still would go very close to any two, because if we fold, we're not going to be in good shape. And picking up that extra 210 chips that are out there is absolutely massive for us.
We're rallying here a little bit of rallying. We have gotten a couple of walks. That's nice. Shoves. We're not calling this hand, obviously, but I'm just trying to think of like what range would we call here?
You see, now we're kind of getting up towards the 50%. So we probably have to tighten up a certain amount, but not too much. Now, his range should be relatively tight anyway, because it's such a disaster for him. If he loses to either of us, he's basically going to be the short stack. So he should tighten his range. So it's not just a matter of we're tightening the range because it's a satellite and we don't want to bubble, but his shoving range should be tighter than normal. And he seems to know what he's doing as well. So I think in this spot, I'm trying to think, probably need something. I wouldn't feel great about ace 10, to be honest. I guess I'd happily go with ace queen, ace king, and ace jack might be the line. And then in terms of pairs, probably 8 plus, something like that.
Good little question in the chat, actually. Someone says, who was it here? Kevin, can you follow up on the late reg question, the we play? This is a good question. So let's say you late register with 7 big blinds. Isn't that just gambling, the we play says? Why is that good for us if we late reg with 7 bigs compared to at the start?
Yeah, I mean, it is gambling, but poker is always gambling. It's still a plus EV gamble. I think the reason why most people don't realize how profitable late regging is that if you do late reg with 7 big blinds, a lot of the time you'll bust first all in, and then that feels like, oh, that was a bad decision. But actually, when you run the maths, there's 2 reasons why it's actually good to have 7 big blinds. At this stage in a tournament. One is because we're nearer to the bubble. There's an ICM gain that we get, which is particularly pronounced in a satellite, because we're not trying to get every chip in the tournament. We're just trying to get over the line. But the second thing is that if you look at a sort of a graph of how profitable it is to play different stack sizes, assuming you're playing them correctly. When you're super deep, your the number of big blinds you'll win per 100 will go up the deeper you get, because you have more tools and you get to exploit. As it comes down, it gets lower. But beyond a certain point, it actually starts to go up again. Like an example I always give is that by far the most profitable spot for you ever in a hand would be if you could register for exactly one ante, which means you're all in. So you have no skill decision. But if you're all in and you can win everybody's ante at the table, and so you're at a 9-handed table, you're basically getting 9-1 on your money. Some people are fold away their equity, so that'll be massively profitable to you. Now that's an extreme example, but it's also true that the shorter your stack gets, the more profitable the spots are. For example, when you have 2 or 3 big blinds, it's really profitable to get in behind the shove of another player, because his shove will force the other players out. You get heads up against him, getting 3 or sometimes 4-1 on your money, depending on how big the ante is. So that's also another insanely profitable spot, which is just purely because your stack is so short.
That's very smart. I like that explanation. Jack 10, we're taking this spot, 6 bigs, I assume, because it's hard for big blind to call.
Yeah. They both don't want to call now, because I mean, in fact, this is close to an any2 spot, I would say, because they just have to fold so much.
Close to an any2 spot. I like it. Well, we can here. Let me copy the hand and let's run it through the isomizer. Would it say any2?
I think the isomizer might say any2, or certainly close to any2. Obviously, that's dependent on them calling the correct range, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if this comes back as any2.
Okay, just quickly running it here. All right, let's see. Does it say any2? What is it? What's our hand? Jack 10. Why is it? Oh no, isomizer under pressure. Can I copy it right from this, or do I need the? No, you can't copy it right from here.
Yeah, I use HRC, so I'm not familiar with the isomizer interface.
I never got into the HRC.
Yeah, I think they're roughly equivalent to. I got used to HRC back in the day because I think it was there before isomizer.
All right, let's just hear. I got it. All right, we're on the button with 600 chips. Small blind has 865. Big blind has 1480. Boom. This is the situation. Top 2 get paid. Hero push. It says 30%.
30%.
30%. What does it have big blind calling?
I guess the big blind's calling range is because he much.
It has big blind calling. It has big blind calling 14%.
14%. Yeah. And if you look at the big blind's call, there's a lot of ace-x in there. So in these spots, if we're going to go wide, we generally prefer because we block his calling range. But yeah, to be honest, I'm surprised it's not wider, but I guess it's a function of the fact that the big blind can call relatively wide.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's not a little wider than that. Like Jack 10's, it says fold 10-9, fold Jack 9. Yeah, we're on ICM.
And this is definitely set for satellite, yeah.
Definitely set for satellite. Let me just double check in case. We don't want the people to have wrong information.
Sure.
Zaddy 2 seats. First place gets. Yeah, it doesn't seem like a satellite. Yeah, no, I just ran it again. Interesting. Huh. Just ran it again. Sadie with 2 seats.
Okay.
It's very interesting.
So the shoving range, yeah, Jack 10 is towards the bottom of that. Yeah, like you can see, we're pretty much shoving all the aces and all the and we are shoving all the pairs. They're kind of the hands that tend to do very well in these spots. just because not only do they have good equity when called, but they block calling ranges as well.
Yeah, it always favors the ace-X to a surprising amount, just because it blocks your opponent's calling range of.
Yeah.
100%.
All
right, I think we got a couple hands left in this one. I can't remember if I got the seat here or not. I've rallied a little bit here. It's looking better. It's looking a little bit better. Hey, we're getting walks. I mean, we're definitely in a good situation now. Let's look at the stack sizes. Yeah, I mean, this guy still has the lead, but.
Yeah, Rainbow Van is playing this really bad. He should be shoving wider now in the button, because Leo Bello's never going to call him off without a hand, and if he doubles through you, he more or less locks up the seat. But by folding, he's putting Leo Bello in a spot where he has absolutely no incentive to shove into you, because he's almost locked up, and Leo Bello is basically hoping the two of you get it in, and then he gets the seat that way.
So this is a spot where he should actually call me pretty wide, because if he folds to me, that's
exactly right. Yeah,
this is the spot we were talking about earlier, where he should call.
This is the spot we talked about earlier. Yeah, he should be calling super wide now. You should still be shoving wide because you don't want to give him the 210, but he should. It's actually correct for him to call super wide. There's another interesting spot that sometimes come up in satellites now. It's not the case in this case, but let's say the button had like 20 times your stacks, and you both had the same stacks. He has so much chips that he's locked up. Now, this is a question I often ask students: is like in this situation where he has 20 times the chips of the others, and they're both in the blinds, what should his shoving range be? And the rather surprising answer is the shoving range should be 0%. He should even fold aces in that spot, because the two shortest stacks are supposed to get it in against each other so much, and that basically ends the satellite. That there's actually even no real upside for him to shove aces and force you both to fold, compared to the upside of you two getting it in.
Interesting. That's why I would not have come up with that answer. Yeah, he's been super tight.
Yeah, he's basically blinded down too much. He's played kind of weird because he did that weird race fold earlier on the button as well.
So if I get this in here, he's gonna call with anything, but I can't.
He should do, yeah.
I can't fold. I can't give him 220 chips though.
But you
right?
can't give him those extra chips either. So yeah, you should shove this hand at home. Going to make a bad fold, or you're going to win the flip. But the upside is pretty significant.
Wow, how do I break out here? This is unbelievable. Wow.
Real.
I'm re-tilted. I just lived the tilt twice.
Yeah, see that looks like a wide call by him, but it's absolutely correct given the situation where the other guy is almost locked up, and it's basically you two guys scrapping it out for a seat.
Wow, I was hoping for happy endings there, but old Kmart was super tilted. Yo, Dara, we're an hour and 20 minutes into now, and I think that's a good place to cap it. Unless anybody in chat, you got a last minute question for Dara here. We've really gotten some good basics here. I think a lot of us can take a lot of this stuff and add it into our satellite game immediately. That was super good. What do you have for you? What's the near future for you look like?
I'm going to my next live tournament is actually in Montreal in the playground.
Oh yes, the party millions is happening there.
Millions. Been to Montreal several times. Love the city. Love the card room. Love the atmosphere there. So yeah, any excuse to go back there is good, and obviously that's a great tournament to look forward to. And then after that, I'll probably take it easy, just play online until Vegas for the WSOP.
WSOP, a lot of satellites in WSOP, or more just tournaments?
I pretty much concentrate on the tournaments while I'm there, but I do obviously play a lot. On this one, there's not much else to play. I'll play a satellite, particularly to the main event. The satellites to the main event near the actual event itself are amazing, and they're probably the best live satellites you'll find anywhere.
Nice. I will probably see you down for the main event. I wasn't planning on playing a satellite, but I feel like I might have to take a crack now. Now that I have some recent training.
What have I done?
Yeah. Okay, everyone says goodbye, Dara. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Follow Dara on Twitter, and if you are interested in upping your satellite game, the book is good. Get his book. Okay, Dara, you're the best, buddy. We'll talk soon, all right?
Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Cheers. Keep crushing, buddy. Bye. That was very, very fun. Very, very fun. How you guys doing? I was thinking about firing up a session after the coaching, but I honestly, I just can't. I'm still too sick, you guys. I'm still too sick. I'm sorry. We powered through. We had a really good coaching session there. I hope Dara enjoyed that. Thank you, Kevin. This was excellent. Nice. Good reviews, good reviews, good reviews. Dara's the man. Chris, I know. I'm a baby, dude. I can't perform like this. I can't play like this though. I'll suck. I'll just autopilot and punt stacks, okay? Feel better. All right, you guys, I'm going to take off. Who are we going to raid? That was really fun. That was very, 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 very enjoyable. And I feel like the late reg stuff is super interesting. Super, super, super interesting. All right, we're going to throw Matty Ice the host. I feel awful. Go Raptors, go. Come on, play, punt some stacks. I just can't. I can't. Too sick. All right, you guys are the best. Give Matt some love, all right? I'm going to go back to bed and watch some Harry Potter or something. All right, peace. We'll see you soon. I hope I can stream tomorrow and feel better. Bye-bye. Take care. Dara's the best. He's the man. See you later, guys. Peace.